Welcome to episode 134 of the Jackson Rudolph Podcast, brought to you by Century Martial Arts and Sport Karate Zone. I'm your host, Jackson Rudolph, and we are going to get right into it today because this is one of the episodes out of all 134 of them now that I've been most excited for, because anybody that tunes in knows that I am a complete nerd when it comes to Bo, sport karate history in general, but especially Bo. I love talking shop, and nobody better to talk shop with about Bo than this man, Cory Lutkus, on the show tonight. Cory, thank you so much for your time, my man.
Jackson, thank you for having me. It is an absolute pleasure. It's nice to be back in the fold, and even though I'm gone, it's nice to know that I'm not forgotten. And I appreciate all the kind words you've been saying about me on your podcast. I did a little deep dive over the weekend, and people that bring it up still, makes me very humble, and I'm very excited to talk more about it.
For sure. And honestly, Cory, that's what this show is all about. It's trying to show like the current and the next generation of sport karate competitors, trying to share some of this history, because it's like for my generation, there was what we got to see, like the people in the adult division or at the tail end of their careers. And then we had like sportmartialarts.com and just like going back and trying to find all the videos. And a big mission of this podcast, when I was doing it by myself, and then when Black Belt Magazine had it, and then now here on Sport Karate Zone, the goal has always been to kind of be the place that people can tune in to hear these stories and to hear, what it was like for these competitors in those moments. And I want to start, for anybody tuning in, if you haven't seen Cory before, don't know who Cory is. Number one, you got some film study to do as soon as this episode ends. But number two, Cory is somebody that changed the history and progression of competitive bow. And he might, smile and shake his head and try to brush some of this off. But I want to be sure that the audience kind of understands what the context of the conversation is today. Because when I first came on the scene and started to get a few wins when I was in the 13 and under division, would have been like the 2007 to 2009 time range. And 2009 especially was the year that Cory really kind of took off and was winning overalls left and right. You could hardly touch him. He won plenty of overalls before that, ISKA titles and everything else. But for me, watching Cory, it was that 2009 season, which I believe was your last year in 17 under, right? Were you 17 that year?
Yes, that was the last one.
And it was just an absolute domination throughout the entire season. That 14 to 17 Weapons Grand Championship, it was Cory's bow form that was winning it just about every time. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure we touched on today, so I'm going to go ahead and bring it up now. Anybody that's ever seen the end of one of my bow forms where I put my fist in the sky and open it up and then drop it down, yes, I have my own religious reasons for doing that. It has its own meaning to me. But the guy that I got it from was Cory. He's the guy that actually started doing it. And because of the way that he influenced me early in my career, in addition to my own personal reasons for doing it, that was always a little bit of an homage to you, Cory, because of how much you inspired me to go for crazy bow tricks and try to change the game myself. So for anybody tuning in, this is the guy that we're talking about. This is the context that this show is being done in. And Cory, I wanted to start by just giving you an opportunity, give yourself a little bit of an introduction and kind of catch people up on the, who are you, how old are you, where you're from type stuff. But then also kind of catch us up on where you've been since the sport karate career came to an end.
Wow, to start, man, really great intro. That was very nice of you. So I mean, as far as like the karate stuff goes, I started when I was 4 and, traditional karate school like most people do, and, worked your way up. I loved the thing of competition, started doing that, getting involved, eventually, going to where everyone is now, NASKA and stuff like that. But that was a long time ago. Now I have been out of the scene for, over 10 years now. I'm 33 right now. I live in Norwalk, Connecticut. I work for the WWE, the wrestling company that pretty much everybody knows. I do a lot of their social media content, stuff like that, on like YouTube and Twitch and TikTok and Instagram. And before that, I was doing a lot of television production for NBC, working behind the scenes at a lot of shows. So it's kind of, if I look back at it, like during the karate time, I always loved like the sport martial arts stuff and like the websites and like cultivating all these things. So it's kind of, I think, led me to this direction now, which is cool. And wrestling is no different than sport karate at all. It's so similar. It blows my mind right now. And I mean, I still have absolute love for karate. Even after my competing days done, I still was active in my original karate school that I started in, and taught and did whatever I could to give back to all my instructor and all the students I had there. So it's still nice. I mean, I do miss it. I will say that right off the bat, but I've had some time to reflect on it, and it's good. And we'll get down that path in a little bit.
For sure. And I love how you kind of draw that connection between what you did in sport karate and how that kind of helped you get to where you are now in your professional life. Because that's another big theme that I always like people to understand on this show is that sometimes people who are bitter about their sport karate past, right? They promote these stories that like, oh, sport karate doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't prepare you for like what's next in life. But if you mobilize it the right way, it absolutely can, right? I mean, people look at the fact that there's not college scholarships for it, but like I wouldn't have gone to the college that I went to and gotten the degree that I got if it wasn't for the sport karate stuff that I did previously, right? So I think it's all about the way that you look at it and the way that you mobilize your experience and really turn it into whatever that next passion is in your life. Or if you continue to do sport karate and find a way to make money off of that, then even better, right? And so I want to take everybody back to the very beginning of your journey, because I feel like obviously today is going to be a very bow heavy talk, right? And so when we rewind in your journey, let's start with, when was that moment? Like, yes, you started doing martial arts classes and maybe saw a tournament, right? But when was the moment that you were like, no, I'm going to be a bow guy. This is what I'm going to do.
Well, before I get there, I just want to like rewind really quick. We're talking about how you went to school and sport karate like helped you do this stuff. I mean, that's just the core value of martial arts in the essence of it. Karate, I was always told, it's 90% mental, 10% physical. It's all about respect, humility, believing in yourself. And I mean, those principles, like even with like my students and stuff like that, and everyone else, like that's what I always try to like push. Like, yes, doing all the karate stuff is super cool, but like if you can get something in here and up here out of it, I mean, you're going to be set. Martial arts is a wonderful tool for anybody. So I just want to put that one out there.
Absolutely.
So as far as like bow, I mean, this is going to probably blow your mind really quick. I never wanted to do bow. I was never wanted to do bow. I always wanted to do commas. That was like my thing, because my instructor in my first karate school, he did a comma form, and I was like, I want to do those. That's all I want to do. Got commas. And then that instructor left the karate school, so then there was no one to teach them. So then I was kind of like, all right, I guess we're gonna do bow now. And I mean, just probably like most people, you take the broomstick handle, you unscrew it, there's your first bow staff. And then I just played around with it in the yard and just had no idea what I was doing. And you just make it up as you go along. And then I kind of was like, oh, this is pretty cool. Now I kind of like this. So that was like kind of my first introduction to doing bow.
And from there, right, because that's like the classic humble beginning, like didn't even want to do it, and I wound up with it. It's actually funny. One of the first weapons that I trained into was commas, and then eventually kind of bow found its way in. And so for you, what was the introduction to NASKA and figuring out that you could compete with bow? Like, what did that progression look like?
So obviously I stuck doing bow through like my upbringings of karate. And then I had an instructor come in, and he kind of was the person, his name was Andy D'Amato. He got me to travel the local New England circuit. And I know there's a couple, but this one was called IPOM, which was more of like a traditional based circuit. A lot of like, basically like there was your Shotokan guys, or there was your Taekwondo guys. And then my instructor, he was a little bit more up to date on what was going on. He had like competed in some national stuff in like the early 90s. So he like saw what was going on. So he started really like teaching me how to like, put it behind your back, do a neck roll, and just kind of the idea of like, you don't have to just like stand in one spot and like do strikes, and like you can like have a little more fun with it. And then obviously sportmartialarts.com was kind of coming in that early 2000s, and my dad found it, and he was like, wow, watch some of these guys. And then I saw guys like Joey and Nate, and Jake Strickland was like a big name back then, and Wayne Douglas and Casey and Lauren. And I was like, whoa, that is what I want to do. I want to go and do stuff like that. And so it kind of progressed from there. And for like 2 or 3 years, I was kind of still on my own, trying to just mold it out. And like the instructor I had, he was a great foundation I had, but like he was only able to take me so far. And then that's when I started working with Joey after that.
Right. And that's the perfect segue, because you talk about kind of competing on a New England circuit. Everybody knows that in those early years, it was that iconic purple uniform with the black hakama, right? And one thing that I want to point to really quickly, because you talk about some of the people that you noticed kind of on sportmartialarts.com that were on the scene right as you were getting into it. Well, when I tell the history of Bo and the way that it progressed, there is a huge gap when you look at like the Nate Andrade, Ross Levine style. And then if you fast forward and you look at my style, which was extremely release heavy compared to Nate and Ross that would never have done a release, right? I always say that like Cory was the bridge, right? Like the athlete, if there was one, that made the bridge from what Ross and Nate were doing with their idea of innovating the bow to ultimately what I did. Cory was the one that in some ways was kind of a blend of the styles, right? You had rolls, you had releases, you had a little bit of everything in your game. And trust me, we're going to do a deep dive on that. But let's start with just the straight up thing. So traveling a New England circuit, how does the relationship with Joey Greenhall straight up come to be?
So I had been doing the local circuit, and I think it was 2003 as a Christmas present. I got a private with Joey from my parents. That was my Christmas present. So started working with Joey. Great. Without Joe Greenhall, there is absolutely no Cory Lutkus. Same thing with Mr. G as well. Like those guys really molded me, got me to where I need to be. So I started out just doing like, privates, working on basics, kind of relearning a lot. Like I had a lot of bad habits or habits that necessarily didn't work with how sport karate would go for me in the future. So it started out with just private lessons with Joey I probably did like 5 or 6. And then one day Mr. G's like, hey, do you fight? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, all right, sparring class, let's go. So then I started going to sparring classes after that. And I would, do a private for 2 hours with Joey. And then I would spar for 4 hours with the people at the school. And that happened for probably a couple months. And like at that same time, like Ryan Wells was with me, because Ryan and me started on that same local circuit together. And once I started going to Joey, then my dad had made the suggestion to like Tim, like, hey, you got it. You should come do this too. So me and Ryan kind of were always like together like that. And then after a couple of months, Mr. G was gracious enough to ask me to join the team in 2004. A couple months after that had started. So that was like the beginning relationship with Straight Up.
That's awesome. And as you're bringing up some names, like that roster that you guys had, especially as like a junior forms and weapons team at the time, because people like the image of Straight Up they've always been a prestigious team, but it's evolved a lot over the years, where now like everybody sees them as a fighting team. But people don't realize that like back in the day, it truly was similar in construction to like a Team Paul Mitchell or like a Top 10 USA Today, or obviously still Paul Mitchell today. But it was constructed where it was truly a team that had a great forms and weapons team and a great fighting team, right? And that forms and weapons team that you would have been on, yourself, Ryan, Dre Rice would have been about that time. Tiffany Larson would have been about that time. So let's just do a quick aside and talk about like how crazy it was to be a part of that roster and that squad.
Man, it was absolutely crazy. So 2004, I wasn't doing the circuit yet. So I was doing another local circuit called Crane, which like you would go to like Ocean States and like New England Open were part of like that whole thing there. And like in 2004, I remember going to Ocean States for the first time, and it's like I had the jacket on. I felt so proud. And then like seeing people like Mark and Sammy and Kim Doe and like Raymond and Jotty had just joined the team at the time. And obviously like Joey, Jessica were there. And then like Anthony Atkins joined the team. And I was just like, oh my God, like this is insane. Like and like these people are all talking to me and like they're super cool and like welcoming. And I was like, this is like an unreal feeling right now. And it was like, wow, look at that roster back then. I would put that roster up against any team in history. Seriously, that was, and for like the next couple of years after that, I would even say like that roster was very stacked, forms, fighting, and weapons. I mean, you couldn't go wrong with that.
Yeah, it was a massive power shift. Like there's a reason that us Paul Mitchell guys referred to those couple of years as Exodus, when Ray and Jotty left Paul Mitchell. Came on Straight Up, as much as I hate to say it, beat Paul Mitchell in team fighting at Ocean States. Like it was one of the heights, and I say one of because Mr. G has been able to create so many of them. But one of the heights of the history of Team Straight Up was that like 2004 era and that crazy team that was put together. And then from there, that's where you start to rack up a lot of your wins, right? You got some of your first big overall grand championship, ISKA, as we can see on the bottom line here, in 2005. And then around then, so 2006 was when I first started traveling the circuit as an underbelt at Bluegrass. And I remember at some of my first tournaments watching the battles and runoffs between you and Josh Corton in particular, and the crazy stuff that you guys would do against each other. So I just want to hear from your perspective, that time frame where you're on this crazy team, you've got maybe a little deer in headlights of like, wait, I'm teammates with these people. And the next thing you know, you're winning overall grands and making a name for yourself.
Yeah, so I mean, like, kind of like, so in 2004, before I started on the circuit, like, obviously we're training all the time. I think in 2004, I like tried to add it up the other day. I think I did over 40 tournaments. We were doing like double shots in a week. We did like Maine, drive back the next day, do a tournament in Rhode Island on Sunday, and then we go back to the school and train for like 4 hours after that. And then you'd go and train and be like, Mark would be there, or like Sammy would be there, or like Raymond would be there. And you're just like, this is like unreal. And then like Daniel Sterling would randomly show up to like classes and stuff like that and like do fighting with us. And it was just like a mind-blowing thing. And like that year, I look at 2004, that was like my primer. Like that was me like getting that grind in, getting those reps in, like we're competing constantly in front of people. And like every day, like Monday, I would leave school, drive 2.5 hours to Rhode Island, train for like 4 hours, drive back, go to school the next day, train all week on my own, and then Saturday be there for like 8 hours, train, stay overnight, train again on Sunday for like 5 more hours. And then like sometimes you do that and do a tournament in the same weekend, and you like have all this great talent and you like learn so much. So then in 2005, I'm like, all right, let's do this circuit. I kind of just like felt like, all right, this is like no problem now. I've kind of already like, I feel like I've done the hard work. Now we got to just focus on, going to these tournaments and stuff. And I mean, it was kind of a shell shock that first year, but like I had the confidence and like the tools to like build and get that confidence to like, all right, I got this. Let's go. And it was like a really just crazy feeling. And like 2005, that was a fantastic year. I think first one was Ocean States, and then I won the US Open, and then I think it was Diamonds at the end of the year. That's Minnesota, right?
Yeah.
That tournament. Diamonds, yeah. So those three. Now after that, I was like, all right, 13 and under's over. Now time to go to 14 and 17. And then I was like, that was where I really was like super excited, because I was watching those guys and I was like, oh man, that's like the next level. Now it's time to like get going. And you're talking about like those runoffs with like Josh Corton and stuff. And I'm gonna cheat a little bit here. I had to like write some notes so I didn't like forget some of these things, because I don't want to like. There's a lot of people I want to like give some shout outs to, but like 2006.
Love it.
I believe Josh was still in 13 under, so I wasn't yet. But like 2006, like for me, it was always the runoffs. That was like the prime. Like that's where I like honestly pushed myself the hardest, because I was like, all right, so now I got to fight these. I got to go and see 16, 17-year-olds, and like these guys are all killing it. And I remember in 2006, it was me, Johnny Liscar, and Jacob Cable. Pretty much every single runoff, it was just the three of us, and we like went back and forth a couple times, and it was just like, I knew it was going to happen. And I'm like, all right, all I got to do is just like keep pushing myself. And these guys are just pushing themselves. And like that competitive spirit was like right there. And I was like, this is awesome. And it was nice. And on top of all that, like I was also like fighting and doing forms and stuff. So I always like, obviously like Bo is where I feel I made the most impact, but like I was in it on the fighting. I loved fighting, and that was very competitive. And like most of the time when I was training went straight up, that's all we were doing. We were just doing sparring drills and sparring, like barely were even doing bow. And I just felt like getting that like endurance and like that stamina and that timing just like carried over to the bow naturally. It was so, looking back at it, I see it now. Back then I was kind of just like, why don't I practice bow more? But I think Mr. G knew like, if you get this down, everything else will just kind of follow with you. And like that 14 to 17, those runoffs, man, those are some of the best. Like it makes me like a little emotional thinking about it now. Like there's guys, and I like want to give like shout outs, like obviously Josh Corton, absolutely underrated sword competitor. Kid was absolutely incredible. Rudy was there. Rudy was the one guy I remember when I first started watching like sport martial arts videos. He was like a young kid, and I'm like, someday I'm gonna have to compete against this kid, so I got to bring it. And Rudy was an absolute beast, and loved working against him. Then like Austin Crane, he was little bit younger, but man, what a talent that kid was. And he was so innovative and like one of like the first young kids really just busting out crazy tricks. And it was just like, oh man, this little kid's gonna kick my butt if I don't really step up my game here. And I just gotta get it. And obviously like Billy Ledger, John Zito, like those guys were my teammates at the time. Like those guys were just crushing it because I knew how hard they worked and how hard they trained because they did the same exact thing that I did. And then you'd have like, like Josh Kahn was still there, Luke Broadlick, like those guys all brought it. And it just really, I think just like that time we're bringing out like the best of each other. And it just really, it was a really nice time. And it really pushed me to that next level. I mean, I feel like everybody at the end of the day was friends, but when it was time to compete, like nobody talked to each other and everyone had the game face on. Everyone wanted to win. It was just, that's what it was. And I feel like that's kind of, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later. That's what was like pushing me to go. So, I mean, those times, man, those were absolutely incredible.
For sure. And I want to talk a bit about the importance of those 14 to 17 runoffs, because I feel like oftentimes when we go down memory lane, like the easy thing to talk about is the men's weapons finals, right? And I'm sure we'll get to the one in 2011 that was you and Matt and Count. Like that was a crazy weapons final, right? At Diamonds, that is.
You're gonna have to jog my memory a little bit on that one.
Oh, okay. We'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
Wild division very vividly sticks out in my memory. But that's beside the point. The point that I'm making is it's easy to fixate on these men's weapons finals, whether it was me, Reed, and Cole most recently, yourself, Matt, Rudy, Kalman, Mark, or the generations before that. You go all the way back to like Mike Chatt, Carmichael Simon, John Valera, and that group. And so it's easy because there's been so many of these great adult division finals. It's easy to kind of fixate your storyline on that. But in 14 to 17, you have much bigger divisions because you're not only dealing with the winners of the individual adult divisions. In 14 to 17, it's the 14-15 winners and the 16-17 winners. And then in your era, it would have been the creative and extreme winners. More recently, the creative, musical, and extreme winners. And so you get this collection of talent, like the names that you just dropped. I remember when I was first getting into those 14 to 17 runoffs, you would have lineups that was myself, Austin Crane was now the old guy, Cole Eckert, Ross Constant, Reed and Cole Presley, Tyler Weaver. Like some of these runoffs were just so full of talent, unlike anything that you see when you get to the adult division, just because of the way that runoffs is constructed. And because we're all kids, we're all teenagers, nobody has really proven themselves yet. And so everybody almost wants it more because you're all trying to prove that you can make it when you get to the adult division, right? And it creates such a great competitive environment, like you mentioned. And there's one name in particular that I want to make sure we talk about because I've dropped this name many, many times on this podcast, but most other people are not as familiar with his game as I am. And that is Billy Ledger, because there's only like 2 videos of Billy Ledger on the entire internet. There's a Pan Am's and then like a random division at Ocean States that you can find. That's about it. But this guy was so far ahead of his time in some of the bow tricks he was going for. I have to imagine you guys had some crazy training sessions together. Can you just give the audience a little glimpse into Billy Ledger as a bow competitor and innovator?
Man, Billy was awesome. And Billy tried the craziest tricks sometimes. And like when we were training, he would nail this stuff. Awesome. And sometimes I was like, trust me, when I came to adults, I think I dropped at every single tournament. Like I competed in as an adult, at least one division, sometimes twice. But I mean, man, but when he nailed that form, it was like, damn, that's hard to beat. And like he had his own style when he competed. He obviously like he worked with Joey, but like the thing about Joey is when he would train, what I saw basically, when he would train someone, he wouldn't train like me and Billy the same. Like Joey was able to like see, okay, this works for you, this works for you. And Joey was never one to like, all right, here's what you're going to do in your form. Joey kind of was like, all right, what do you got? Like in the beginning, he was a little bit more hands-on, but like as we like progressed, he was kind of like, we were coming up with like our own ideas and stuff like that. So, I mean, like he never like shied away from our ideas and stuff like that. So like Billy's forms were the way he did them were like perfect for him. Like his style, like he was very quick. He had great releases and like very innovative releases. He was doing a lot of stuff where he's like catching it behind the head, and he was doing like the throw catch behind the back stuff, which I kind of shied away from a lot because I wasn't totally comfortable with that stuff. But like that was his thing, and like he did it so good, and he always had great music when he did his forms, and great dude, good fighter as well. Can't underestimate that. I mean, it was a good time, man. That era of dudes, like, I mean, a lot of us stuck around, but I feel like we made like a decent impact on, the sport, and I'm happy about that.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you guys, that was quite literally the generation that inspired everybody that was in my generation that was coming up and trying to follow in you guys' footsteps. So undoubtedly a huge impact on the sport. And before we get too far removed from the mention of it, I want to jog your memory about that 2011 Diamonds Finals. The reason that I care so much about this particular weapons division is because 2011 was a big season in my career. That was kind of like when I first came out on the scene and was winning consistently. Mm-hmm. You, of course, were in the adult division by this point. And the 2011 Diamonds, what most people remember for it is that it's when Kalman did the blindfolded double sword form and retired. The reason that I care so much about this division is that everybody forgets that in that division, Matt Emig hit a ridiculous form that in any other scenario would have been contending for the overall. And you hit a ridiculous bow form with like some crazy scarecrow variation where you like completely bent over and it spun lower on your back. I had never seen that before. Like you also hit a crazy bow form, but it was one of those. And I think everybody that's competed at our level can think back to a time in their career that it's felt like this. But from the outside looking in, when Kalman put on the blindfold and hit the double sword form and everybody knew that he was retiring, it's one of those divisions where you're like,
yeah, I mean, listen, one thing, and I'm going to compare this to like wrestling a little bit right now. Wrestling is all about like telling a story. Like, man, what a great story that is for him. That is like, first of all, absolutely incredible competitor. Kalman was so innovative, total mastery of his craft. And I mean, man, I'm like thinking back at I'm starting to remember. I do remember that incredible performance, but like add on like it's his retirement. Like, oh my God, like, could you write a better story? you couldn't. Like, it's a great thing, and just like being like Matt and Kalman, like you mentioned these guys, and we'll get there, but like, man, what an honor to like be in the ring with these guys. They are truly a once in generation talents, and just to like be in the same conversation as them is all I need.
For sure. I love it. And so getting back kind of on our timeline here as we're going through your career, we kind of went off on a tangent after talking about the influence that Joey had on you and getting some of those early wins. And then where I was talking about is in 2009 when you really go on that tear and you're just dominant. The other significant thing that if people are going back and combing through the YouTube videos is there was a uniform change during that time period where you went from straight up and then we're representing AmeriKick. And this is at a time when AmeriKick was really AmeriKick had been around for a while, but they were really kind of creating a big name for themselves as one of the top forms and weapons teams in the sport. There was even, not many people know this, there was even a time that I was maybe going to be on that team and then wound up not happening.
I did not know that. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. It surprises a lot of people because of how deep I am in the Paul Mitchell side of things now. And ultimately, just to peel the curtain back a little bit, that's the reason that I wound up not going to AmeriKick, is that I was waiting to see if Paul Mitchell was going to give me a call. And ultimately, I waited another 6 months from around the time that AmeriKick was showing some interest. And ultimately, Paul Mitchell did call. But that's all beside the point. What I want to know is that what was that timeline for you? Going from straight up, where obviously you have a lot of really fond memories, great experiences, and then the team switch, how did that come into play?
All right, I'm going to kind of go around it. It's gonna be a little bit of a long answer here. Having this happen so long ago, I've had to, when I saw the question of the thing, I had to really think about it. As I've gotten older, I've gotten wiser, hopefully, and I've had some time to really kind of reflect on it. And this also kind of leads into why I kind of stopped competing. I would say end of 2007, 2008, I lost my passion. I was kind of like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. I was kind of like, I started doing like track in high school and I got really good at that. And I was like, oh, maybe I want to do this because I want to go to school. But I'm like, it's still here. I still have that it's going to be really hard to just like stop right now. I can't do it. Like I have 1 more year as a youth. And I mean, sometimes change is inevitable. It was probably one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. Looking back on it, it was very emotional for me. I had been a straight up guy. They made me, plain and simple, you know? And that decision to leave, I kind of just like thought, okay, maybe this change can help me reignite this passion. But also I kind of felt, trying to think how to word this. I kind of felt like, all right, I think my time with straight up is done. I want to see if I could do this somewhere else without this team. And at the time, that was the first year AmeriKick was like a team, like a NASKA team, like if I recall. And it was, you know, Jarrett and Jake and Josh Kahn were on it, and my boy David Muhammad, shout out David Muhammad, love him, man. And Jake and Josh had told me that they were going, and they were like, there's an opportunity if you're interested. And it was a lot of back and forth in my mind and talking to my parents. And at the end of the day, I was like, I'm going to make this jump. And I 100% stand by my decision. Bob, Jill, Mark Russo, Jarrett, those guys are so great. They were so great to me. And I'm so thankful for everything they've done for me. And I just felt there was time, and it was a nice refresh for me as well. And it kind of got me, because I know you had asked about this 2009 run.
Yeah.
That was a totally different person that was in 2009 when I went there, and making that team change made that run what it was, for sure. Like I had such a good time that year. That was the main thing that I'll remember from that year, is I had such a good time. I enjoyed myself. I was having so much fun competing again. I kind of want to say it felt like a weight was off my shoulders, but it's never off your shoulders when you're competing. I mean, like there's never, if you feel like there's a weight off your shoulders, that's when you go like this. And when I went to adults, that's what happened, because I didn't have I felt like I had no weight on my shoulders at all. I just was going with the flow. So going to AmeriKicks, it was a good time, because like, you know, sometimes to be with people that you really like and like people you care, like me, Jake, Josh Kahn, very, very close. Love those guys so much. And like being with them also, it helped me kind of get through like what I was going through, like personally at the time. So that's kind of like the long answer of why I made that switch.
No, for sure. And I appreciate you kind of taking the time to let us kind of feel the emotions of that, because that's something that I feel like sometimes in the sport today, there's moments that I feel like we don't have that anymore. Because I remember, you know, being on Change the Game, which was Lauren Carney's team.
Yeah, I do remember that.
My coach, you know, since I was a kid. And the dream was always Paul Mitchell for me, right? And I remember getting offers from other teams that were coming with sponsorship. Like there was a time when maybe I was going to go to the All-Stars before they ultimately merged with AmeriKick a few years later, and then they got unmerged, and that whole thing happened. But either way, like there was a time when All-Stars was in the mix, when AmeriKick was in the mix. Team Imig came about, and there was a time when even Team Imig was in the cards for me. And ultimately, it was, like to your point, an extremely emotional decision that for me wound up saying no to some people on just kind of a wing and a prayer that hopefully, you know, the Paul Mitchell thing would work out in the future. But I think that sometimes, you know, we see people switch teams nowadays, and it seems like, you know, some people are on a new team every 6 months or something like that. And it's like, no, when I was coming up, and as you just described, it's like, this is a team there's an allegiance to the people that help you become who you are. And when new opportunity knocks, there are new allegiances that can be formed, to your point. As one of the things that I think is a great takeaway from your story is that despite how emotional it was and despite how difficult it was, by the time you're in 2009, it was one of the best decisions, right? Because it helped you kind of reinvigorate that passion, redefine who you were in some ways, and then go on a tear, right? And so I want to transition from that and get a little bit technical, and everybody that knows me is like starting to lean into the screen here, because one thing that I noticed as I was going back and watching the tape, because you DM'd me like a few of your favorite forms, and I was going back, and obviously I'd seen them all at least once already. But I was like, let's go back and refresh my memory. And one thing I noticed is that from tournament to tournament, from division to runoff, there was something that I always have respected a lot about your game that I was reminded of, which is there were these little twists and turns and little things that were different, right? If at one tournament you would do Leviosa and 360 it, but then there was a runoff in Quebec where you spun around and then caught it behind your back. And so the question that I have, and there were times that you would do an extra rotation on Scarecrow or let the Scarecrow go behind your back instead of catching it up top or whatever, right? There were all these little variations. And that's something that I preach all the time was a huge key to my success, was noticing guys like you doing that and saying like, no, from tournament to tournament, from division to division, I want to be able to change. I want to have this new trick up my sleeve. I want to have this. And so for you, how much of it was testing yourself and just wanting to see what you could throw? How much of it was watching your competitors and making those decisions strategically to try to get an upper hand, to try to give the judges something fresh? Just kind of try to go back and put us in your mindset when you are making those little changes and adjustments to your form over the course of the season. Where's the motivation for those changes coming from?
So, all right. So let's talk about like 2009, because honestly, that's where I really did it. I did extreme weapons, creative weapons, had different forms for each. My extreme weapons, I never did a trick that I couldn't do like in my sleep. I never did any crazy bow tricks that like weren't out of the ordinary. Because it was the extreme division, I always try to just do extreme. Creative division, I had one form. Runoffs, I had another form, and then finals, I have another form, like you said. So the way I kind of worked on it was, first thing you said was kind of look at your competitor, see what you got to do. You're experienced enough. There's people experienced enough. You know when you need to do something, and you know when you don't need to do something. That comes with seasoning. And like I said in the beginning, in 2004, I did 40 tournaments a year. Like, you learn that thing. Even in my first few years of like NASKA, I was still I have a younger sister. She also does martial arts, and she was competing in that local circuit at the time. And I had a couple students. So even when I was in full NASKA mode, I would still go to local tournaments and still compete. And that's where I would try out new things, because it didn't matter. I could just do whatever I want. And in like 2009, I had like 5 different variations of my form at one point. And I was just like, which one am I going to do today? And the other thing was I always had like different variations of music. So it also like I would decide the music like that day, depending on how I was personally feeling. If I like didn't feel well, it would be like a kind of more simple music. If I was like feeling really good, that's when like I would have like a custom music that I had made. Because I know like a lot of the music and stuff people use, like there's like I remember like Brandon Osborne, Stephen Rennie used to like make all like that dramatic music. Never really fit me. I came from like Joey, and Joey always had the best music. Kim Doe always had the best music, sound effects, and like popular music. So that would kind of get me in the mindset. But I mean, as far as like changing my form, and I'll be 100% honest with you, a lot of it was happening while that form was going on. The way I kind of trained that year was I had like my structure. All I would train was like the striking combinations and a couple different variations of the trick, and that was like it. And then the game time, I know what I got to do. You have this feeling from when you compete long enough that like sometimes your hands feel weird when you're out there and like you're doing bow, and you're like, I don't know if I should do something that slides right now because it's probably not going to stick. Or if I do one thing and like I feel off, like how the bow's rotating, I'm like, I'm not going to do this next thing. And I mean, that's just an adaptive, and that's just reps and reps and reps and just having that thing. And in 2009, I was just like, I kind of was very comfortable with what I was doing. So I had my like set like routine, but then it was just kind of every single turn I was like, all right, what am I going to do this time? And also, I'm a person that I can't do the same form every single time. It will drive me crazy. I understand there's nothing wrong with that. But like personally, I could never do that. Like I understand like some people, like you have your routine, you just start nailing it. Even if like you're winning with that, I could never stick with the same form, or I had to change something. It would just, I think it's like ADD or something. It just bothered me because I don't know. You got to keep them guessing.
Mm-hmm. And I love that. And ultimately, like, this is something that when I teach seminars, this is something that I always preach to the kids, is that, consistency isn't about being perfect. Consistency is about the ability to adapt. And that's whether it's consistency just hitting your form or consistency winning the whole thing and winning the overall. Because ultimately, to your point, like, something is going to happen, whether it's the division or the runoff or on stage. Something's going to happen where something isn't at the right angle, or it doesn't feel right, or you feel funny. Something's going to happen. And if you have adaptability and you're able to do something else on the fly and make it work, or you're able to have plan B, C, D that you can rely back on, if you're able to do those things, then you're going to hit your form more often. And statistically, if you hit your form more often, you're going to win more often, right? And so I love the fact that you're validating the way that
I just had like another thought too. I'm sure you've felt this. Sometimes you go to a tournament and like the AC is on at these tournaments and it's like so cold and like your hands like don't feel right. And another thing I remember like during that time, now I see it's everywhere. They didn't always have like the puzzle mats at tournaments. But I remember like we'd just be in hotel ballrooms and just be like on that hard concrete. And like looking back at it, I am so happy that they decided to put mats, because like those guys that were like tricking and everything back then, oh my God, this, like, I can't imagine what these people's knees, like my knees and hips are shot as it is. Like just stuff like that, just like the littlest things. And like you said, the consistency is like, that's a very good quote. I love that. That's really good. But I mean, it's also accountability for yourself. You have to have some accountability in knowing your craft. I mean, listen, everybody gets nervous. Everybody gets anxious before they go. Trust me, I had planned that. But you have to like have that accountability. Like, I have trained, I have done this, and it's going to be fine. Win, lose, or draw, the world's not going to end tomorrow. You're going to be fine. You're going to move on. You're going to learn from this no matter what. And having that consistency, I mean, it all comes down to your training. And like, I'm sure that you have preached this to your students, like, training is way harder than competing. It is way harder and like, you'll never hit a form as good when you're training than as you do when you're competing, but it's because you train. And I mean, that's what it comes down to. And, building your muscle memory and having your timing down and just feeling it. It basically comes down to me. It was always a gut feeling, and it's in your heart. You know it, and you know it as well. You can have a moment where you're like, no, I'm just going to do this instead. And I would not suggest that to people that are just starting out. Definitely don't try that. When you get a couple reps and a couple of years under your belt, that's when you will be able to see that. And that's when you see the great competitors. Honestly, that's what separates a good competitor from a great competitor. That, in my opinion, at least.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I couldn't agree more. I mean, that is spot on. Like, you're saying so many things that it's like, I feel like I'm listening to myself in some ways. Maybe I picked it up subliminally.
You got the right mindset. You know how this works.
For sure. And so what I want to transition to now as we continue to go down this timeline, we already talked a little bit about some of the matchups that you had once you got into the adult division. But sometimes when I'm going through it, I'm watching Bo videos. Some of my favorite years of yours to watch are those like 2010, 2011 years in the adult division, because as you already mentioned, like there was a weight lifted, like there was a little bit of a change in the way you felt about competing. But man, some of the stuff you would throw was just ridiculous. Like, I remember, I could not find the video for the life of me. Maybe I just saw it in person, but I remember like at Cat Classics one year, you had this move where, and I've never seen anything like it since then. You were up at the front of the ring, like right in front of the judges, and you did like a swing towards your hip.
Oh, yeah. The back release.
You just chucked it. You just chucked the bow probably 20 feet in the air, and then you literally like walked 4 or 5 steps as you were turning to the back of the ring, caught the bow at the back of the ring, and then just kept going with your form, right? So tell us about, we already talked about matchups. Just tell us about being in the adult division and feeling that emotion of like, screw it, let's just go for it.
That's funny you mentioned that Capital Classic. That was actually my first tournament as an adult, because I wasn't sure I was going to, after 2009, I was like, I don't know if I want to, like, I was starting school and I had like I was doing D1 track at the time. And that was like a very, very heavy commitment. And like, I was like in the weight room every day, and my body, and I got hurt. I had torn my ACL. So I was kind of like, I don't know if I still can do this right now. This is like really weird, because the thing about like going from karate to track, and I've had like friends that are like physical therapists and stuff. They're like, Cory, when you do karate, there's no really natural movements for your body in karate. Everything is so circular and like full of motion. And when you go to track, everything is this way. And I was getting so hurt when I started track. And my buddy was like, it's because your body is not used to being normal. And that like kind of scared me for a little bit. But in 2000, I think that was 2010, that Capital Classics, I was like, you know what, I got to try this. I got to try this deal. And that move you're talking about, that's not what it was supposed to be at all. It's the funny part about that thing. I think I won that division too, it blew my mind, because I'm like, what the, I don't know how I could have won that division. That like blew my mind. But what I had supposed to be doing is that throw went way farther back than it should have, which is why I had to go backwards and catch it like that. But normally what I did, and I've never tried it again in a tournament because I felt so weird about it that first time. I was like practicing it, and it was like stuck in one spot every time I would do it. So it would like kind of be waiting, and I would reach back without looking to grab it. That was supposed to be the ending, but for some reason it just like launched. Probably my hands were slippery or something like that, and I had to grab it, and then I had to whip it in like that. But going into adults, it was really cool. My one regret about like, if I had to have picked one regret about competing, it would be my adult years, because I did not train. I was not into it mentally. I was kind of burnt out about the whole karate thing at the time. So for me, it was more of like, let's go and have some fun and just let's see what happens. And those forms, I mean, I'm pretty sure I dropped at every single adult tournament I did. But I was trying to do some really just wild things at the time. And I was like, you know what, if I'm going to go and do this, I'm going to go all out and just try some things I've never done before, and just let's see what sticks. And I mean, like going into those divisions, like you said, Kalman and Matt Emick and Mark Canizato, and like those guys, like I idolized those guys growing up. Like these guys are absolutely incredible. And like to be in the ring with these guys is so cool. To me, and like Ross too. I love like competing against Ross Levine was just like, oh my God, like I love this guy. I mean, Ross, I grew up, and like when I first started in 13 under, he was the 14 to 17 guy. We were like the two bow guys at the time, and like we had a cool bond my first year. And Ross was super cool. I got to like, me and Ross train together sometimes, and I mean, I kind of like we're very similar. Like we did bow and we fought, so we had like, and we're tall dudes, so I mean, we had this similar thing. So like it was honestly just like it felt so cool to like compete against these guys. I don't know if I was ever like nervous to like go in the adults, because I wasn't like, oh my God, this is different. I'm like, no, this is the same exact thing I've been doing for the last 4 years. So like, what's different about it now? Oh, I can win some money. I mean, that's kind of cool. But I mean, going those times, it was very cool. I really wish that I gave it my 100% effort. I would have loved to seen what could have happened. But at that time, it wasn't there for me. That's basically what I could say. But I enjoyed it.
I think that's a good segue to talk about something we've kind of alluded to throughout the show. And trust me, we've got more talk from your career coming up.
I got all time tonight, man. I'm off.
One of the big things is that we wanted to talk about is what ultimately led to that decision to step away. And we've kind of been building up to that, right? It's just kind of felt like your heart wasn't in it anymore. Is there anything that you wanted to add about ultimately the decision to focus on other parts of life than sport karate?
Well, I mean, the main reason is just my head and heart were not in it. And I'm going to call myself a hypocrite, because when I was teaching seminars and like doing things, at the end of every seminar, I would be like, if you want to be good at this, you need to just fall in love with it. And that goes for anything in life. If you want to be a good lawyer, you want to be a good doctor, you want to be a good garbage man, if you want to be the best, you have to fall in love with what you're doing. And I had fallen so out of love with competing at the time. I never fell out of love with karate. I'll never fall out of love with karate. I'm a traditional karate school kid, and that'll never go away. I understand that. But like the whole competing thing, and I think at the time, like I was going to school, and I was like, career opportunities were happening, and I wasn't able to give it my all. And I was kind of like, I don't know if this is for me anymore. And I kind of just faded away. I tried to do adults for, I think, like 2 years, and I would like hit just random tournaments. I never was like, I'm going to sign up and do points and try to get a seat or anything like that. That was never like my intention. But I mean, it was like almost like this thing I loved so much was like making me so depressed. And I didn't, and like looking back on it now, It's just kind of like, that's what it was. I just was not in a good place, like mentally doing karate. Like if you can't give your all to it, why waste your time? There's a lot of money involved. There's a lot of travel, a lot of sacrifice. And I just want to say, if there's anybody that feels like that I had let them down or disappointed them, I am very sorry for that. And I had to do what was best for myself. And I mean, I wish I could have done things differently, but I mean, that was my time. I mean, I look back at it and I'm like, my God, I only competed for like those 4 years, like total. And like, it's not that long of a time in hindsight, but like when you're in it, it feels like you were doing it for like 20 years.
Right.
And I think, that was just that chapter had to close so I can move on to do and be where I am now. I mean, I have no regrets leaving. I mean, I wish I had done other things like that, but I think in the long run, that is something that will just be here for me. And I am very proud of everything I've done. And it's just funny, like I'll be at like work and so all of a sudden I'll hear like music and yelling like down the hall, and someone has found a YouTube video of me, and then everybody's watching it, and it's like, oh, it's kind of cool now, like looking back at it in hindsight. And I think also at the time, like when I first started in 2005, oh my God, like 2005, if you looked at the overall scope, it was massive. Like those years were insane. And it's unfortunate just how everything is cyclical. I think like, the sizes and like, the hype of everything kind of died down a little bit. And it kind of felt like, do I want to keep doing this for me personally? And it's not the right way to look at it, honestly. And like in hindsight, looking at it now, I should have like done something. I mean, like I wish I could have done like that one last run as an adult, but it is what it is.
And I want to take a moment to validate some of those feelings, but also to say, because you beautifully described this kind of conflicted nature of like being proud of what you did and being grateful for having done it, but then also that like loss of passion for competing specifically that came in at the end, and like wondering if you let people down or. And I think that the thing that comes to my mind is I just recently heard one of what is now one of my new favorite quotes. I was actually at church, and the pastor said this in the context of something else, but I'm applying it here. But he said, your life is the result of somebody else's dream, right? And when I apply that to my life generally, but also my life specifically in karate, I realized like, oh my God, the dreams of so many other people contributed to me having the opportunity to do what I did, right? And the reason I bring that up is to say that, like, Cory, even though, it was that relatively short period of time in the grand scheme of things, like, it was your dream to go and be successful and, represent straight up and then AmeriKick and win for those teams and do everything that you could with a bow. But ultimately, you pursuing that dream was a huge impact on me pursuing my dream, right? And like, I would not have done the things that I did without being inspired by guys like yourself, right? And I think that that's one of the beautiful messages here, is that I think that everybody would look back on their career. Like even I look back at my career, and there's regrets that I have about the timing in which I needed to step away from it. And I think what I want to share with the audience is this is going to be an emotional topic for everybody that competes in sport karate, because if you do sport karate, it's a passion project, right? You're not going to get rich and famous off of it. You're going to get, maybe 100,000 views on YouTube, and that'll be, what you get, right? And so if you're doing it because you love it at some point, right? And that means that for everybody, almost, stepping away from the sport, especially if you've done it for a long time, is going to be hard. And Cory, talks about how stepping away from the sport for him was like this difficult decision and kind of changing of how he felt about the sport that is attached to all this emotion. Whereas like the way that I stepped away from the sport, in contrast, was like ripping the Band-Aid, right? Like I was still in my competitive prime, still had the passion for competing, still actively wanted to go out there and win US Opens and Warrior Cups and Diamond Rings and do all of this. But at the time of my last US Open, I was starting medical school a month later. And I was like, I know for a fact that I will not be able to put into it a month from now what I've been putting into it for the past 15 years, right? And so I just ripped the Band-Aid and said, okay, that US Open's going to be it. I'm not going to try to like drag it on and see how much longer I can put myself out there. And so that is to say, everybody that is ultimately faced with this decision is going to struggle with it. And it's going to look different for everybody. And that's okay. I think it's really the purpose of what I'm trying to say. Cory, forgive me for the length of that monologue, but
no, man, that was very good stuff, man. And it's different for everybody. And it doesn't matter what sport you do or what you do. Going away from something that you have so much love and care about is very, very difficult. And like for like the longest time after I was done competing, I honestly was like, am I ever going to be as good as anything as I was successful in karate? I'm like, am I going to be as successful in anything else like as close to this? Or was like that my peak? And it was like kind of hard to deal with at the time, but you have to look at those as your building blocks. That's what just makes you, and like looking back, that's a great building block I had to kind of push me up. And without that, there's no here. So I'm very happy with all that time, and I have no regrets about that. And it was great. And like you said, I mean, you ripping the Band-Aid off, I wish I could have done that. Right after 2009, that would have been great.
No, I love it. And so we're going to transition from all the emotions, and we're going to do what any bow competitor does and cover up their emotions by talking about bow again.
Good. Push it up.
So we left off talking about the adult division and like some of the crazy stuff that you were going for. Out of all the stuff that you went for in your career, what are, if it's one or if it's a handful, like what are the tricks that you look back on and you're like, man, I'm so glad that I went out and threw that?
All right. Well, I have to preface this because you were saying some trick names before that I did, and I had no idea what you're talking about. You said, because I don't know if I ever really like named anything. I think I might have. You said scarecrow. You have to remind like
so
which one is that?
Like the continuous neck roll. That's what I don't even know. That's what it's called. But
okay, so you have a sidetrack here. When I think of scarecrow, I think of Justin Eaton. Justin Eaton used to do a trick called the scarecrow, where he'd do a vertical palm spin and stand on one leg sideways like this. And he kind of did it as like a goof thing, but that was to me was scarecrow. I don't remember what I called it. I think I called it like a whippersnapper or something like that way back. That was like what I first called it, because like that move, honestly, that move was I don't want to say my claim to fame, but like that was the move that kind of like put me on the map, I feel personally. And I mean, that move was a total accident. Like I was like most things, like that was a total accident. I mean, I was trying to do a shoulder neck roll and just spin around and like do a swing out of it. And then like I missed it with my hand and it like went again. And I was like, huh. And I remember like, because like way back, I used to put a video camera up when because I would train by myself, and I'd be like, what was that? And I'd like go watch it again. And it took me like a week to like get that again. And I just remember I got it. And like the first variation, it was 2, and it was only to catch behind the back. And I was like, I don't think I need to catch behind the back. And the first time I threw it, it was a spur of the moment thing too. Like in 2005, that was just like, all right, I'm going to do it. I didn't tell anybody. I'm just going to do it and see what happens. And I got a great reaction. And I mean, that move made me, people go, oh, wow, look at that thing that he does. I'm like, that's pretty cool. And I mean, like I've seen some of like the videos I've been done like Rebel. I'm glad to see people still do it like that. Now it's a basic move. I'm sure everybody could do. I'm pretty sure I can teach like anybody to do that now. But back in that time, that was like, oh, okay, that's something pretty sweet. And then what was the other thing you said?
So context on Scarecrow, I can't remember for the life of me who taught me that's what it was, but the explanation that I was given was that because of the way that you hold your arms when you do it, that it's like you're hung up like a scarecrow.
I see that. All right, I like that name better. Now I'm thinking about it. That's a way better name.
It's funny how because I'm somebody that for the moves that I made up when I was competing, I was very big. I'm like, I'm gonna give it a name because that's like the way people are gonna remember it, right? But you're not the only person that I've talked to. I want to say, who else has been? There's other people that Matt is very much like this as well, where like you just did stuff and you didn't really go and name on it. You
weren't worried about naming it. You're just like, all right, this move's pretty cool. I'm going to do this move.
But the other one that I mentioned, which was another one of your signature moves, was Leviosa, which is a Harry Potter reference. The one.
Okay, I have to correct you because now I remember. I did not call it Leviosa. I called it Levi Corpus, which is another Harry Potter spell.
Okay.
I mean, you guys keep it how you want. It doesn't bother me, but
no,
I just remember.
Who makes up the trick should be the one that names it. So corpus.
No, you guys have taken everything, gone above and beyond. You guys get all the pleasure of naming everything. But I mean, those two moves were pretty cool. And I mean, like, I think I got a lot of cool variations out of that one.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I mean, it's such an easy move. And like now I'll look at these moves, they're just super easy. And I mean, like, the one thing that I thought about with like tricks, and I listened to some of your other videos and we were talking about like putting combinations together. That was always like my thing. Like, I need like, everybody could do like the one throw or like the one neck roll, but like, let's put it all together. And like you were saying, like tons of releases in a row. I was always more like, all right, let's do release, a spin, a body roll, and then let's add something weird at the end of it. And that was kind of like my like way I was going through it. So I thought I had like some pretty cool combos back then. Now I'm pretty sure like the wipeout division does that on NASKA, but it was cool back then, and I'm like really proud of some of those like stuff I was able to put together like that.
Yeah, for sure. And you're not the only one who feels that way. I remember like back in 2012, I was the first person to throw the bow up and spin twice and catch it behind my back. Mm-hmm. But now, like, literally every 9-year-old that does bow can do 2.5s. Like,
you showed me that. You sent me that ISKA video from this year, and I'm like, oh my god, everyone just did like threw their bow up and spun 3 times like it was nothing. I'm like, at what point? Like, what's next? It's just crazy.
Yeah, it's wild. So another big story that I want to talk about, I definitely wanted to make sure that we touched on some bow tricks, which, by the way, I don't care what you say, I am calling what has been called Leviosa for a while now. I'm calling it Levi Corpus for now on, because that's what it deserves to be called. But we can leave Scarecrow as Scarecrow. But
yeah, leave that. That's a way better name than Whippersnapper. I don't know what I was thinking back then.
So this is going to be my segue to that 2009 WK USA.
I'm excited about this one.
One of my favorite moves that I came up with is a move that I called Orbiter. And I came up with that move around the time that we all went to Spain on that trip. And it's the one where you throw it from behind your back, it travels around your body, and then you catch it on the opposite side.
Yeah, I love that one.
And the moment that I knew that it was going to be a good move was I was like, so 2009, I had been I was on stage throughout 2009. I made stage for the first time at Diamonds of 08, but I had one.
I'm going to time you out because I know what you're gonna say now. Because I remember you coming up and talking to me about this when I was competing, and I honestly, I'll be even dead honest with you, I had no idea that you had come up with that beforehand. I remember Joey had done that before, and I kind of took it from Joey. I mean, listen, I'll be real. A lot of my stuff comes from other people. I only saw that over the pop catch thing. That's just an Eaton move. He used to do that when he was warming up all the time. I'm like, what is that? Show me how to do that. And I just did it. And then he wasn't around the scene anymore. I'm like, well, I think I'm going to try it now. I mean, I get it. It's fine. But I mean, and you had talked to me like, oh, I saw it. Like, I came up with that move. And I think I did it one time. And then I dropped it. And the next time I'm like, I'm never doing this move again. I don't like this move anymore. But then I saw you do it. And you keep it way tight to your body. And I was like, he does it way better than me. I'm not going to do this anymore. Because I used to like try to like throw from low and have it come up higher to catch. And that's way harder. But like the way you did it nice and tight was like so smooth.
Yeah. No, for sure. That was one of the things that I had figured out about it was that originally I was trying to keep it super far out, and it was like super
way harder.
But I love the point that you make about how like we all get inspiration from other people.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm like, I'm not the guy that's ever gonna like die on the hill of like, no, I came up, because like so many people come up with so many different ideas and different twists of it. You know what I mean? But that move, when I tried to show it to you in Spain. Was that it was like a team training session. It was like the first time that I brought it up. I remember like you tried it a few times and like you thought it was kind of cool. But then I remember like must have been a couple months later, Twin Towers came along.
I'm gonna apologize now, man. I'm so sorry for stealing your move, man.
I don't consider you stealing it at all. Because to me, like I saw you go for it at Twin Towers, which is the tournament that you're talking about where you wound up dropping. But like the fact, because I was like somewhat self-conscious about it. I was like, I don't know if this is any good or not. I just moved myself, right? But the fact that like I saw you go for it, and then I was like, oh my god, this move's good enough. I should start throwing this, right? Like to me, that was the validation. That like, oh wait a minute, this is good.
Yeah,
right? I should go.
I mean, dude, that's honestly. I mean, listen, people, I even remember back competing, like, oh, so of course someone did your double neck roll. I'm like, so who cares? Take it as a compliment. Take it as a compliment, you know?
Exactly. Right. For sure.
I mean, do it against me, I might have a little bit of an issue, but I mean, I'm just kidding. But no, I mean, all the bow tricks. I mean, that was always the most fun. Like, let's face it, coming up with new ideas, coming up with combos, and like everything always comes off of something else. If someone didn't come up with a shoulder neck roll, it would never have been two spins. It would never been a catch right in the back. If someone didn't throw it, you wouldn't have spun around 4 times and caught it underneath your leg. I'm sure someone's done that in a competition already, but I mean, that's what it is. That's to me, that was also, it's like a really good thing about martial arts. It is such a community, and yes, it's a competition, but like you're not going to be better competitors if you don't try to outdo each other.
Yeah.
Plain and simple. I mean, do your best you, obviously, first, but like, you know, you're competing against a bunch of other people too. Obviously, everyone's like, oh, your biggest opponent's yourself. Well, I don't know. Have you ever stepped in the ring with Rudy right now before? I don't think so. I'm not my biggest. That's not my biggest. I'm not my biggest competition here. So I mean, it's all fun and it's good stuff, man. And there's some crazy stuff that I've seen. Pretty impressive stuff I've seen that I went down the rabbit hole recently here. So I mean, it's bow tricking is in a very good spot right now. So
oh yeah,
I'm glad everyone's still innovating and doing it, and it's just really nice to see.
For sure. And we're going to dive into that in just one second. But I want to give you an opportunity to talk about that 2019, because people talk about how like the USA basketball team that's going to the Olympics this year is the Avengers. Let me tell you, was 09 WKA USA. And I'm not including myself in that because I was a kid, right? I'm just happy that I was a part of it. But around my age, we also had Sammy Smith, Amanda Chen, Gabby Wolf. So that division was stacked. But moving up in the age groups, yourself, you and Nick Schneider doing the same. We had Jarrett, we had Matt, we had Nikki Stanley, we had Becca. I know I'm forgetting people too. We had Will Greenberg on that team. Like that, from a forms and weapons perspective, that team was absolutely loaded in every single division. It was an embarrassment to any other country that showed up in Spain. But I just want to give you an opportunity. I mean, we were there for like 2 weeks too. Was that not like the best sport karate 2 weeks of your life?
So that's when I should have ripped the Band-Aid off, if I'm being really honest, after that trip, because I had such a good time and none of it had to do with karate. Like that was such a cool place to go to. The beach was awesome. I mean, like we stayed in this pretty sweet hotel. Food was kind of meh. But like you said, what a random just assortment of team. And I remember that, like you said, Matt Emming was there. And that was his first time coming back after that knee injury that he had. So he was like super nervous. And he's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, I don't know. Like, and I remember just talking like, dude, Matt Emming, like, do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. You can go out there and do nothing except for stand there and just say, hey, I'm Matt Emming. I'm sure they're going to love it. And like you said, like you racked him up. Like everyone was just racking up gold. It was a sight to behold for sure. One thing I do remember is I got disqualified in Korean forms for kicking above my head. That was the only division I didn't win. Yeah, I got disqualified because I did a form, and I knew there was the rule that you can't kick above your head for some wild reason. In a Korean form division, you can't kick above your head, which is, I don't know, I'm pretty sure what most Korean martial arts are known for is their high kicks, but I remember some guy just came up to the judges, like he kicked above his head and he like had a video camera and he like taped me from the back and he like did it in slow motion. It was like, all right, I guess you guys can have it if you want. Like, it's not that big of a deal to me. But that was a great time. It was just like, honestly, it was like a vacation with a little bit of karate just splashed in. Everyone was just doing their thing. It was like after the whole circuit was done and everyone was it was kind of like a victory lap from the year. I kind of look at it as.
For sure.
And then the infamous sync form.
Yeah, so we got to talk about that, right? Doing the sync with Nick. You guys also did it at Diamonds a couple years later, team FSU, right? So tell us about that sync form happening.
All right, we are not going to talk about FSU stands for because it is all. That's off limits right now.
University, you're a Seminoles fan, right?
There you go. Yeah. So shout out Nick Snyder, one of my dear friends. I absolutely love the dude. We were on Straight Up. We had tried sync a couple of years before. Obviously, him living in Minnesota, me living in Connecticut, him running karate schools, me like finishing up high school. We never like ever got to really try and practice. We would just go to the tournament, put something together. I'm like, all right, let's do it tonight. That was like our first iteration of it, and it never went well. And we decided we're doing this Spain thing. We got a whole week to put a form together and then do it. And I remember he had flown in before we left for Spain. He flew in on like a Friday, and we left on that Sunday. And I'm like, all right, we got to make up the form this weekend. He's like, all right, cool, sweet. By the time we left for Spain, we didn't even have a form really ready yet still. We get to Spain. We talked about it on the plane. We put it all together, just talking about it. Just like, I'm sure you do this all the time. We're like, oh, yeah, do this, do that, do that. And then we got to Spain. We just practiced it all week. And I remember we did the runoffs, and it was not very good. I remember I screwed up like 2 parts. And then that was the last division of the weekend. I really shouldn't be telling this story, but I'm going to tell it anyways. But let's just say we got no sleep the night before. I remember getting back to my hotel room. It was probably like 6:30 in the morning. And I was just like, dude, the competition's at 9, Nick. We have to get ready. He's like, let's go there right now. Just start practicing. And we didn't even say a word to each other for 3 hours. And we just stared at each other, and we're getting ourselves just mad pumped up. And I'm like, we got this. Let's just do it. And that was honestly one of my favorite things I've ever done in my life. That form with him. That was such a, and I thought we nailed it. I thought we did it. I thought we nailed it. And I thought we did a really good job with it. And I was so proud of it, like Nick, and I'm so glad we did it together. And that was really good. I was really proud of that performance, despite all leading up to it. I was makes me even more proud of the performance now looking back at it. And then we did do it at Diamonds a couple of years later. And that was a tough pill to swallow that night. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a little bitter about that one. I thought we nailed that form that night, and
I was gonna say, I thought you were making that sound like you didn't nail it.
No, I thought we nailed that form, and the one thing that made up for it is when we got low scores, the whole crowd started booing, and I was like, "That's all I need to hear." That's what made up for it for me. I'm like, "You guys, yep, you boo these judges." I don't know what they were looking at. It's all good. But I'm happy we hit it. I'm happy we made it to a NASKA stage. That was the better part. We finally made it to a stage. But yeah, that WKH trip, man, that was something else. You're right. The Avengers showed up, and we went digging for gold for sure.
I love it. But yeah, those are like those memories being on that team. Like that was one of the huge things that like motivated me moving forward in my career. Because that was my first time like being teammates with any like big names. Like the first 2 teams that I was on, the Premier Martial Arts team, and then that got changed over into Change the Game. Like we wound up being great teams, but we were all developing together. Like it was all developmental and like Change the Game. Ultimately, we won a lot of overalls because we had me in my breakout year. Kyle Montagna won a lot of overalls. Kayla Johnson, Connor Griffith. Like we ultimately became a really good team. But when it started out, we didn't know that we were actually going to wind up being that good, right? And so you
guys had a great team. You guys, and more importantly, you guys were just all good people, man. You guys, your parents, you guys are all just mad cool, mad respectful. Always appreciative of you guys. And you guys all worked super hard. And you guys all made it. You guys should be very proud of that fact.
Thank you, man. That means a lot. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
it was in many ways an experiment. And then for me, at least, like that 2009 WKA, that was a sign of what it could be, right? And then I remember it feeling very similar to that when I got on Paul Mitchell at 2012 U.S. Open, which was Matt's retirement tournament. And so to be teammates with him on the WK USA team, and then my first tournament on Paul Mitchell would be like when he's leading, so poetic and cool to just be in that in those team meetings and get to feel that. But anyway, the other thing that we want to talk about before we close out the show is I sent you some links. You've watched the entire men's weapons final from the U.S. Open this year. You've seen a couple of the top bow girls that are out there right now, and then sounds like you went down the rabbit hole a bit yourself.
A little bit.
Was watching a lot of the people that are on the scene right now. So I just want to hear your reaction to kind of catching back up with the sport and seeing what bow looks like now.
Oh, man, first of all, everyone is just absolutely killing it, man. And I see a major progression of just like the skill level everyone has now and just, the performance aspect of it. It is really nice to see everyone just good. And it's really nice to see that bow is pretty dominant right now, it looks like. I mean, there's a lot of other good weapons competitors, but it seems like Bo's pretty. It always felt like things fluctuate. Like I mean, not to say like what's hot, what's not. I remember like when I started, I would say like, I don't know, commas were pretty hot when I like at 05 and stuff. They were pretty good. And then like Bo kind of took over for a little bit. And then when Kalman started doing sword got really hot. Everyone was doing sword after that, and which, rightfully so. And then, everyone kind of had their own thing. But it looks like, a lot of dominant Bo competitors, but a lot of everyone else is doing some really cool stuff right now. Really cool stuff. And I mean, like, I look at some of these kids, like, oh my God, these are the adults. I kind of remember some of these kids when they were like in like the 9 and under division and stuff like that. And like the first person I saw was Esteban Tremblay. Esteban, you were killing it, but I'm gonna embarrass you a little bit right now. In 2009, Eric Tremblay had brought me to his school to work with some of his students and train with him. And I remember he goes, "Oh, this is Esteban," and he had to be like 4 years old at the time. It was just this little tiny kid, and he was like a yellow belt or something like that. And he was just like crazy running around, and he was just like all over the place. And he tried to do Bo seminar, and he would just kind of be with it for a little bit. But he was young, so his attention span kind of wandered for a little bit. But he was just so funny. I just remember him. And Eric is a great dude. Love Eric. So cool. I'm glad to see he's still running it on the competition. But man, Esteban, wow, I'm very, very, very much impressed by that. Great success to see all that he's done. That's so cool. And he did some I think he did like a cart full, and he like passed the ball through his legs, it looked like. I'm pretty sure that I was like, whoa, that is a risky move for anybody to be trying. And I give him much commend for that. And I'm very proud to see that he has come that far. And then Jake Presley, I'm glad, obviously Reed, Cole, those dudes. And like, I remember Reed, man, what a dude Reed was back in the day. He was like my first competition at 13 and under in those grands there. And I was just like, man, to see all the stuff. And I'd never seen the double Bo until this past weekend before. I never had seen that. And as I was scrolling through, I saw it and I was like, whoa, that was some cool stuff. That was pretty sweet. I was really impressed with that. And I was just like, all right. I'm glad to see that everything is just going like this to me. And I mean, a lot of other cool stuff. And then who was out there? I wrote down some notes here because I don't want to do it. And you showed me the ladies, Sarah and Samantha. Man, I mean, what great competitors those girls were. Super clean strikes, just like really cool manipulative stuff. And I mean, it's nice to. I mean, obviously we talk about like. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about a bow route mushroom in a minute, but I do want to say like one thing. There is a nice lineage of female bow competitors, and I'm glad to see that has gone on. There has been so many amazing bow competitors, female-wise, over the years, and it's nice to see like kind of a lineage continue. Because I'm never going to compare boys and girls, but I will always say girls are way better at forms than boys, and it just they look so much better when they do it. Like they just have a swiftness about them, and like even when I was like training like kids at my school, like I always thought like, all right, these girls are way better than these boys. Like I don't even know, it's not even like a thing. So it was cool. And Jake, man, what a traditional bow form. That was pretty solid. I'm glad to see that. Like I always felt like there was that one person that's like, all right, I'm gonna do traditional and just go against these creative guys. It was always a huge risk to do that, but like it pays off like tremendously if like you just nail it and you stick to your gut and you like show that. Really cool. And then who was the other kid? Ben Jones, I believe is his name. Man, smooth combos, dude. Real smooth. And just these triple spins. I'm just like, what in the world? Like everyone's killing it. You train those kids?
Yeah, Ben and Esteban are both mine.
Very cool, man. Good job with those dudes. And the last kid, Will Nevitt, I think his name is, from Infinity. Shout out Mike Welch. I definitely see Mike Welch in that kid. And man, what a cool form. The flying side kick, neck roll, popped me big. I was like, that was pretty cool. I could have never thought about that. Now I do want to ask one thing. I saw a lot of creative, but like does creative rules change? You could do a little more like tricking in them now?
So people are more comfortable bending the rules than what they used to be. So effectively like so the rules are still the same. Like it's still like you can't invert and you can't do more than a 360 in the air. But there's some weird stipulations where like if you just do a 540, that's illegal. But if you do a 540 and go to the knee, or if it's like a 540 and you immediately drop into a front sweep, it goes back to there was an arbitration. There was an arbitration about how technically on a 540 you're only doing a 360 because your drop goes to the back. So there's a lot of little things like that. Like people do backside nines now, which a backside nine has never been anywhere close to an actual 900. But people are now doing backside nines where they'll like start with their hips square so that when they jump, spin, kick, it's still technically a 360. So we could go on a full rabbit hole.
Yeah, wow, that's wild.
Creative rules, but it's the same rules. People are just taking more liberty with them than they used to.
I mean, they're not wrong.
Exactly. That's
I remember like a couple of tournaments, like when I was younger. I remember Charlie Lee used to go to the men's creative forms division, and he would watch every single form. And if something was not in that realm, he'd be like, "They are disqualified." And he would just like, I remember there was one tournament. I'm pretty sure it was like Daniel Sterling, Mike Seafray, like Will Valentine, Anthony Atkins, like all got disqualified because he was like, "Nope, you guys broke the rules. You guys are done." And I was like, whoa. And then that kind of like stuck for like a long time. But then it kind of got lax. I think Matt was kind of like that first person. He was doing like a double leg 540. And that kind of was like, all right, people are starting to bend the rules now. Nobody really cares. But it's cool, man. It's like everyone's looking real cool out there. It's glad to see everybody doing their thing. That's real cool. And shout out, I also saw a video of Jeff Doss. Love Jeff Doss. I'm glad he's still running it. What a cool guy.
Yeah, man, absolutely. It's so refreshing to hear. Like, I think that one thing we talk about how like in sport karate, you do it because you love it, right? And I think that something that every single generation so desperately wants is like the validation from the generation before them is like, hey, like the whole reason that we did this thing was because of these people before us. And so for them to like say that like we're carrying the torch appropriately and that we're like doing our own thing and that we're doing it right, I think it's really refreshing for a lot of people to hear because like ultimately that's the reason that we do it is for the love of the game and trying to make the people that came before us proud of us. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt the same way. If I can like have someone I looked up to say, "Wow, that was really good," that's all I cared about, man. But it's a feeling you can't beat.
For sure. For sure.
Or even if they tell you, "Man, that really sucked," I'll still be okay with it. Tell me what I can do better.
Absolutely. And so I think the perfect thing to close with, as we've now kind of covered that full gauntlet from talking about the past, talking about the right now, in my opinion, because I love these barbershop Mount Rushmore conversations, right? Bo is the hardest weapon to do it for, right? Like, I think Chuck's is pretty straightforward. Commas is kind of difficult, but you can figure it out. But Bo is like the most difficult.
Very hard to
figure out. So if you were going to give your Bo Mount Rushmore, who makes it on?
It's so tough. I mean, you have to look at a Mount Rushmore. Do you look at like the impact they had? Do you pick your favorites? Do you pick people that most inspired you? I mean, I kind of clumped it all together. I mean, I have a definite three, and the fourth one is I'm gonna definitely throw out some names, and I'll have to pick one at the end. But obviously, Joe Greenhall is on my list. Big Nate Andrade, absolutely. I mean, those two guys put together, I think you can see my inspiration. You know, Joey was just absolutely. Joey would do things that you just would never. You like if you had to like sometimes double think like, what did he just do? And like. He would do such like complex things, and it would just like you're just like, wow, I never even thought about doing something like that. He would take just like little tiny basics, and I think that's one thing that I kind of like. One of the major things I got from Joey, and like one thing I try to like, if someone had asked me for advice, that I would like tell them, be like, you need to make your basic stuff stand out way more than you think. Like everybody could do all the tricks now, so like what's gonna like set you apart is like doing combination like striking combinations and like changing your levels or like doing it with an opposite hand or adding like an arm movement into it or something like that. And like Joey was just so innovative with like every little like tiny manipulation. He would just do like the smallest things and I would be like, that's so cool. Like I don't understand why nobody does that because it's also like so easy. But he just made it look so good. And like Nate, obviously crazy body roll variations, just like obviously coming as a taller person, like watching a bigger guy use it. It's like obviously being taller and like you understand what I'm talking about. Like a taller guy versus a shorter guy doing the same thing is going to look totally different.
Right.
And you kind of like Nate had like a very good and Nate had given me like advice about like, cause you're taller, like use this tallness to your advantage. Like you can make things bigger. You can do like when Nate used to do a baseball swing, like it would be like the most insane thing ever. Like if you were near the ring, you felt like you were gonna get hit in the face. And he's like, you have to make those like little tiny basic things like that. Like people will be like, whoa. Like if you can make a baseball swing seem impressive, then like everything else after that is a cakewalk. Right. It's really cool. And my third, obviously, man, Jackson, you're up there, man. Your consistency, your innovation, your longevity, just I'm looking at all these like competitors and I just see the inspiration come from you. I know you say that you have had inspiration from me, but everyone's looking at you, man. And like you have this longevity right now and you're very consistent with what you do and how you do it. And it always looks so awesome, man. Like much praise to you, man. You have really like you talk about these other guys, you have taken them all, done this and put it up here, man. So you definitely got to be proud of that, man.
Thank you.
And then fourth one, God, this is like a hard one. I mean, I'm just going to mention some names. Ross Levine, obviously. Love Ross so much. Justin Eaton, who I mentioned before, who's a huge unsung hero, I think, in the bow world. Mm-hmm. Justin Eaton, he wasn't around competing that long, but man, that guy was awesome. He did a lot of the local stuff with me, so I saw him a lot very early on, and I was just like, that dude's pretty sick. He had he was like one of those first guys to kind of do those arm, catch it on your arm pops. He was like the first person I ever saw do that. So I was like, that's some sweet stuff. I got to put my boy Nick Schneider up there. I love Nick so much. And Nick was a huge influence on me. And Nick kind of like taught me kind of like how to go with the flow and like kind of like have my game ready and stuff like that. And then a huge unsung hero, Mike Welch. Mike Welch is so sick. There is not, I'm sorry, everyone else, you guys are killing it today, but there's no extreme bow competitor like Mike Welch. Like, man, that guy, when he was like, honestly, I think the first person to do it. And man, he was so good. I never seen anybody do like an extreme bow form before until him. And I was just like, I've seen people do like aerials or like a 5-4. He's doing like crazy stuff with the bow. And he was so creative also with his like striking ability and stuff like that. Such like so cool stuff. So I mean, I'm gonna cheat and start all those guys in my fourth spot because like I can't pick one, man. It's so hard, and there's so many other great people out there. Casey, Lauren, Becca, like those guys. Those ladies are incredible at what they did, and I got a chance to work with all of them. They also had an influence on me. And like one thing, if I could say, anybody out there listening, take any advice you can get from anyone, good, bad, because you know why? It's gonna make you think differently. I mean, like we talked about, like there's the Bernardo style, the Greenhall style.
Yeah.
I meshed it all together. I took bits and pieces from everybody, from Nate, from Joey, from Lauren. I learned all these things from Ross, from Nick. Like that's what made my style what it was. I just kind of took what worked for me, and that's what you got to do, you know?
Absolutely. No, I think you did a great job of just number one, naming names that need to be named, right? I mean, that's one of the hardest things. I almost feel like you could do 2 separate Mount Rushmores and you just like cut it off by the year 2000. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You've got Bernardo and Gary Waugh and Casey, and like you've got this whole crew that could easily be on the Mount Rushmore themselves. And then you've got the newer generation where all the bow tricking innovation came in. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Ross and Nate are going to be up there. I'm always going to put you up there. It means a lot to me, obviously, that you put me up there. But then,
appreciate it.
You know, some of these guys that are out there right now, you're like, okay, if these guys continue at the rate that they're currently going, I mean, you're going to have to include some of their names in the conversation, right? So
100%. I hope one of you guys got that last spot. It's all yours.
I love it. So yeah, for me, obviously being a Bernardo guy, and then one of the greatest blessings for my like sport karate brain was after I graduated college, while I was going through the med school application process, I lived in Oklahoma for a year at Century when Century still owned Black Belt Magazine. Mm-hmm. And the office that I got there you can go back and watch some of the old podcast episodes because I'd use it as my backdrop. But the office that they gave me had every issue of Karate Illustrated from back in the day.
Oh, wow. That's some cool stuff. I used to get that mailed to my house.
And I would go through and literally, like, when I got off work, I would always leave like an hour late because I would just sit there and go through old Karate Illustrateds.
Oh,
and that taught me so much about like the gravity of somebody like Mike Bernardo's career. Like Mike Bernardo once went like 54 consecutive tournaments without his bow form losing. That's like 4 seasons on NASKA.
Yeah, that seriously is. That's a lot.
So Bernardo, because of what he did to start the lineage,
Absolutely.
I mean, Casey, Lauren, myself, Wayne Douglas, Kyle, Becca, like there's so many of these people that are direct students from that lineage. So Bernardo's always going to be on my Mount Rushmore. Casey is always going to be on my Mount Rushmore. And I love what you bring up about Joey because of his like ability to create these like super unique little transitions and variations of strikes. Because where I got that from was Casey, right? And they both had their own way of doing it. But Casey also had this like super unique way of coming up with ways to strike and ways to move her hand around the bow that you just hadn't seen before. So I love
I have to tell you one story. I have to interrupt you. It's about Casey and Joey.
Ooh, go for it.
Back in 2005, there used to be this karate camp called All-Star Camp. Reggie Perry used to run it. He used to bring like every great fighter, every great forms competitor, every great weapon competitor, and you'd like stay at a hotel for like a weekend, and you just have like training blocks. Like you scheduled out like classes, like you're going to all these classes basically. You train with like Jotty, Raymond, Joey, Casey, Steve Tirada, Daniel Sterling, Matt Emmett, Kib Doe, like all these people were there. And I remember there was one time that Joey and Casey did a joint seminar together. And what they basically did was like, we're going to make up a form. Casey's going to do the first section. Joey's going to do the second section. Casey's going to do the third section. Joey's going to finish it off. It was honestly like mind blowing. Like just watching them two like put a form together. Like it doesn't seem like it would work, but it works so good. Like they were both obviously great teachers and great bow people, but like they just had, you could tell like they were having so much fun with it. So it was like everyone else felt it too. It was so cool. Sorry to interrupt you. I'd tell you that story.
No, you're good. I mean, the amount of money that I would pay to like jump in a time machine and go back and like learn that form.
Oh man, it's so cool.
Yeah, I probably couldn't afford it. But so yeah, I mean, obviously, Mike and Casey are going to make my Mount Rushmore. To me, Nate and Ross, whichever one you want to put up there, either of them deserve it. Like their contributions together to the sport. It's really interesting listening to Ross because Ross like puts all of the credit on Nate. And you're like, well, wait a minute, Ross, you went out there and you did some stuff too. And so whichever of them you want to put up there. And then Cory, you put me up there. I'm putting you up there, my man, because
I appreciate it, man.
like you bridged that gap. You were the one who introduced all of those new releases and concepts that people hadn't seen before, and being able to blend that in with the body rolls. It's a style that, in my opinion, has never been replicated, and I don't think it ever will be, because I think one thing that I teach my guys a lot is that, you know, in some ways the game today is so heavily dependent upon speed that there's certain body rolls that you almost can't do in a form anymore because of the amount that you would have to slow down in order to do it, right?
Yeah.
And it's because of that dependence on speed that it's like, I've taught my guys, like, hey, you guys are going to have to be release heavy. And the thing that you guys are also going to have to do is, as you noted with Esteban, like the next step is who can mix together all this bow stuff with the tricking and like be able to make it happen in one combo, which obviously was something I could never do. And so that's kind of the progression of the sport, right? It's like, you know, whatever the judges are liking right now, whether it's the speed or the volume of releases or mixing in the tricking, you got to go with what the judges are rewarding. And so it's really fascinating to just watch how it's evolved. And I think there's no better way to end the show than to tell you how much I appreciate your contributions to the evolution of bow and helping it make me the competitor that I became, and ultimately giving us a lot of great memories as bow competitors to look back on.
Man, Jackson, thank you so much for saying that. That really does mean a lot. And it's like kind of giving me like a little bit of the itch right now to go find a bow, because there's a lot of stuff that no one has seen ever that maybe someday I have to try and film and show you, because there was one question you didn't get to. You were like, what's the craziest thing you ever done? it's a form that's no one ever seen. It was for my 3rd degree black belt test. I did the craziest form I've ever done in my life. I don't think I could ever do it again if I tried, but it was 2009, obviously that year. And it just, all my like old instructors came out of like retirement, and a lot of my old karate colleagues that hadn't done karate for years, but were still my good friends. They like went and bought uniforms and like came support me. So I'm like, I got to do this for these guys. And I mean, it's so weird how that's like always like your best things is no one will ever see. But I think that's what keeps it exciting. But Jackson, seriously, man, I appreciate it. I appreciate what you have done. I'm glad you're doing this podcast and preserving this history, because there's a lot of cool stuff out there. And like, obviously when I was coming up, we didn't have, obviously social media is a huge help to all this stuff, and being able to archive this footage now. So it's really cool that it was nice to dive back, and it, makes me think a lot about all this stuff. So I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Of course. And then before we get off here, I saw my mom in the comments, so I had to put this senior division right now.
Oh man. Well, I have gotten myself back into some decent shape finally. So you never know. Never say never, I guess, right?
I love it. I love it. There's no better way to end the show than the cliffhanger that we might see another Cory Lutkus bow form. And who knows? You know what? I'll add to it. If Cory comes back, then maybe Jackson comes back, and we've got one go at it where we all just throw one more bow form out there.
It's never happened.
That'd be awesome.
Never happened. Maybe we'll have to make it happen someday.
Again, Cory, thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you to everybody in the audience for staying with us. If you're just tuning in here close to the end of the show, make sure you rewind this whole thing back. There's a ton of gold in here. We're going to try to see if we can get some clips of it and try to make some content that way. Cory, if you ever dig up the video of that black belt test bow form.
Oh, no, dude. No videos a lot of black belt testing. Come on, now. It's private.
Okay.
I know that.
But anyway, so thank you again, everybody tuning in. A huge thank you, as always, to Century Martial Arts for making everything that we do here at Sport Karate Zone possible. Cory, any last words before we send it home?
Everyone be well. Keep doing what you're doing. Love what you do. It's the only way.
Love it, man. Absolutely. This has been episode 134 of the Jackson Rudolph Podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Rudolph, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.